So what is it about a political system that rejects the apparent will of the people, because that is what is happening in the United States? Most of the population want a change to gun laws. The President, as we've seen, wants a change, but Congress, it won't budge. Let's bring in US political analyst Adam Lockyer. Described as a shameful day. How did it get to this point, Adam?
So we had just a day of shameful politics in DC today. So we have a few Democrats that have decided to vote no against this fairly basic and popular measure, basically because they're coming up for re-election in very conservative states.
So it's just the fear of what the NRA, what the gun lobby can do to their own electoral prospects?
Exactly. So they have nothing to gain by voting yes. So people who are largely in support of these measures, so when they do the opinion polls, we're looking at upwards of 80% of the American population want some sort of background checks for people who buy guns. So these are popular measures. So yet if they vote for yes, they're not going to pick up votes, whereas if they vote no, there's going to be a conservative backlash and they're going to lose votes.
So how does the NRA, what you said notwithstanding, the NRA and its membership override the will of the overwhelming majority of people? And why can't politicians be convinced to stand up to that?
Well, we're seeing that some have stood up to it.
Yeah.
So we have,
and the vote was relatively close.
It was very close. Yeah. So we have 4 Democrats that voted no. They were all up for re-election in the midterms.
And if they voted yes, it would have been over the 60 vote.
It would have been very close. Well, we had those 4, plus you had Harry Reid, who changed his vote later on when it became clear that it was going to be struck down. He changed his vote because that gives him the option of injecting the bill again at a later date. So that was more of a strategic thing. If those Democrats had towed the party line, they would have been up to 59, very close to the 60 they needed to push the measure through.
So where does this leave the President now? I mean, obviously he said don't give up on this. A lot of people are going to be wondering, if this can't get through, then what will?
Nothing will. No. So this was the low-hanging fruit, and it was still out of reach. So we saw that this is not about new measures. This is about background checks that are going to be universal across the board. So there's already background checks. If you go to a gun store and you buy a weapon, they will do a background check. Yet if you go to a gun fair, there isn't a background check. So this is just about making it universal.
What's already there.
Exactly right.
So what are the chances of actually getting these powerful guns, the assault weapons, out of the hands of people?
Well, that was also up for a vote today, and that lost by a much larger margin. So that was a
that you can take off the table.
Exactly. That was a 60-40 vote. Whereas the background checks, that was a bipartisan bill. It should have got through, and it didn't.
So, you know, one thing that is extraordinary, isn't it, is that you have people here, the memories of Sandy Hook. I was really struck by the comments of Congresswoman Gabrielle Gifford, who herself had been shot, saying, if the politicians fear the NRA, imagine the fear in the eyes of those children as they were about to be shot. Even that doesn't sway people. Even that isn't enough to overcome the fear of what might happen in an election. And
Obama has been playing up that side of things.
We saw that as his State of the Union.
State of the Union, he's been using the victims and the families of the victims of Sandy Hook to a large extent. So at the State of the Union address, but also whenever these bills are being pushed through Congress, he flies them in on Air Force One. There's always a lot of publicity around the families and the victims before a vote. He makes sure that the families meet the senators directly, so they refused to meet with their political advisors. They needed to meet the senators and look them in the eye. And even that personal contact was enough to push the bill through.
So it's not just about guns, though, is it? This is really an indication of what's been called the political gridlock that America is going through. And whether you're talking about economic policy, whether you're talking about guns, whether you're talking about issues such as immigration, there is this steadfast lock when you get into Congress, isn't there? What is going to change that?
So you see this with immigration reform right now, with Marco Rubio being stuck in a bit of a corner. So on one hand, he wants to support measures that are going to give a road to citizenship, but at the same time, he doesn't want to put off his Conservative base because he's a contender for the 2016 presidential elections. He knows he needs to push through the primary, so he needs to be strong to his base, but yet he has to be moderate enough to be acceptable to the large number of American people.
What's extraordinary here is that the Conservative base is shrinking. The Conservative base has been rejected at successive elections now. Obama came back in claiming a new mandate to be able to push through change, and still people won't budge. What does this say for the future of Conservative politics, apart from anything else in the United States, if they're going to be seen as out of touch and obstructionist?
Well, this is the big question, particularly about the budget and about immigration. So Obama carried a lot of the Latino vote by about 40 points in most states. So what the Republican elite have decided is that they must be able to reach out to the Latino vote if they're going to stand a chance. Otherwise, they're going to be the wrong side of demographics and the wrong side of history, and they're never going to win anything. So this is a part of the push for immigration reform. But at the same time, like I was saying, they have to be able to still reach out and talk to the base. Otherwise, they won't be able to get through the primaries. They won't get re-elected.
Yeah, and obviously still crying out for the sort of leadership that is able to bring the base with them and also reach out to that next constituency, as you're talking about.
Exactly
But
right.
today, in the words of Obama, a shameful day, and certainly when you look at those children and others who've been killed in recent attacks, it's absolutely extraordinary.
Exactly.
Adam, thank you so much for coming and discussing that. Adam Lockyer.